Snoop Dogg, known for his influential career in music and entertainment, recently acquired a prestigious car dealership in the heart of Sunville, a bustling city full of luxury. The dealership, Luxury Motors, was renowned for selling high-end vehicles to an elite clientele. From the outside, the dealership was impressive. Sleek, modern cars gleamed under the afternoon sun, showcasing the finest craftsmanship. It was a place where only the wealthiest of customers walked in, dressed to impress, and ready to make significant investments. On this particular day, however, Snoop had a different plan. He decided to step into the dealership unnoticed, dressed in a simple gray hoodie, worn jeans, and sneakers, far from the typical attire of a luxury car buyer. He parked his modest SUV in the back lot, intentionally avoiding the spotlight. He wasn't here to make a purchase, but to observe how the staff treated a regular customer who didn't fit the usual luxury car buyer mold. As he entered the showroom, the contrast between the sweltering heat outside and the cool, air-conditioned interior was evident. The showroom floor, lined with pristine vehicles, smelled faintly of leather and wax, a telltale sign of the dealership's attention to detail. The employees, some chatting near the front desk, paused as soon as he entered. Their eyes quickly scanned his casual attire, clearly skeptical of whether he was someone important enough to engage with. But Snoop wasn't here for assumptions. He was here to see the true nature of how things ran when no one knew who he was. What would the staff assume about him? And how would they treat someone who didn't fit their preconceptions of a luxury car buyer? If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Now, let's continue with what happened next. As Snoop stepped into the showroom, the air was cool and refreshing, a stark contrast to the hot sun outside. He looked around, observing the pristine luxury vehicles lined up neatly on the showroom floor. The faint scent of fresh leather and wax filled the space, adding to the feeling of exclusivity. A few employees stood near the front desk, chatting casually, oblivious to the fact that one of the most famous figures in the world of entertainment had just entered the building. Snoop's presence went unnoticed for a moment. Dressed in his nondescript hoodie, worn jeans, and sneakers, he blended in with the ordinary customers who might stroll into the dealership, hoping to get a glimpse of something luxurious. He wasn't here to buy anything. No, today, Snoop had a different mission: to see how his new business was being run and, more importantly, how people would treat him when they didn't know who he was. He was curious about the assumptions that might be made based on his appearance, and how the staff would behave when they thought he was just another regular customer. From across the showroom, a middle-aged woman with sharp features caught his eye. She wore a perfectly tailored blazer and polished heels that clicked against the tiled floor as she approached him with purpose. This was Elena, the dealership's manager. She held a clipboard tightly under her arm, a symbol of authority and efficiency. As she neared Snoop, her expression was polite, but there was something cold about it, a mask of professionalism, yet with a touch of condescension. "Excuse me," Elena said, her voice cool and clipped. "Can I help you with something?" Snoop smiled, his demeanor calm and unbothered. "Just here to look around," he said casually, gesturing toward the array of vehicles on display. His voice was even, and his gaze was steady as he glanced over the luxury cars, pretending to admire their design. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly as she took in his casual appearance. She had clearly sized him up and determined that he was not the type of customer she expected. She responded with a tight smile, a look that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Are you interested in purchasing a car?" she asked, her tone now slightly more pointed, as if questioning his worthiness to even be in the showroom. Snoop, however, remained composed. "Something like that," he replied nonchalantly. Elena, clearly trying to maintain her professional demeanor, tightened her smile, but there was an edge to her words. "Well, we cater to a very specific clientele here," she said, her tone almost dismissive. "Most of our inventory requires pre-qualification. Perhaps I can recommend a different dealership." She made no attempt to hide the assumption that he might not be qualified to afford any of the cars in the showroom. Snoop raised an eyebrow, taken aback by her assumption, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he kept his cool and asked, You're assuming I'm not qualified? Elena's expression faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. I'm just trying to save you some time, she said with a smile that didn't quite seem sincere. These cars start at 6 figures. I could direct you to a dealership that specializes in more budget-friendly vehicles. At this point, Snoop's patience began to wear thin. He couldn't believe how quickly she had judged him based on his appearance alone. But rather than confront her immediately, he decided to observe how she would handle the situation. That's quite an assumption, he said softly, letting his words linger in the air. Elena, however, didn't seem to recognize the gravity of her misstep. Instead, she continued to press, her voice carrying the air of someone who believed she was in control. If you're serious about buying a car, she said, we can set up an appointment. But for now, I'll have to ask you not to touch the vehicles. Snoop stood still for a moment, absorbing the situation. He glanced at the silver coupe nearby, its sleek body gleaming under the lights. He reached out, brushing his hand lightly against the door handle, then turned back to her. Nice car, he said simply. Elena's gaze shifted slightly, her expression unreadable, but she maintained her polite yet strained smile. It is, she said, though there was a noticeable edge to her voice now. Perhaps when you're ready to make a serious inquiry, we can set up an appointment. At that point, Snoop had seen enough. He folded his arms and took a step back, assessing the situation with quiet frustration. This was more than just a simple misunderstanding. It was a demonstration of how assumptions based on appearance could shape someone's experience. He was no longer just a bystander in this encounter. He was a participant in a much larger story about respect, fairness, and perception. As Elena turned away, her dismissive attitude still lingering in the air, Snoop stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. He hadn't been expecting an encounter like this. In fact, he had been curious about how people would treat him in the absence of his fame and fortune. But the way Elena had judged him so quickly, dismissing him based on his appearance alone, struck a nerve. It wasn't just the fact that she had assumed he couldn't afford a car. It was the way she had made that judgment with such ease, without even trying to understand who he was. Snoop wasn't angry, not in the way someone else might have been. He had learned over the years to handle such situations with calm and composure, taking the high road instead of reacting impulsively. But the sting of the insult was there, a sharp reminder of how quickly people could judge others based on their outward appearance. He understood it was part of human nature to make snap decisions, but it didn't make it right. He exhaled slowly, collecting his thoughts before he decided how to proceed. The dealership was supposed to be a place of luxury, of high-end vehicles, but it also seemed to be a place where the staff lacked the essential quality of true customer service. Respect? Snoop had seen this sort of thing before in other settings, where people were treated differently based on their outward appearances or assumptions about their worth. But he had never been the one on the receiving end of such an assumption, not in a place like this. As Elena moved farther into the showroom, continuing her duties, Snoop mulled over his options. He could simply leave, write the encounter off as a lost cause, and chalk it up to a simple misunderstanding. But that didn't sit well with him. He had built his success on the belief that he didn't need to be defined by what others saw on the surface. People might make assumptions about him based on the way he dressed, the way he spoke, or the way he carried himself. But he knew that he was more than that. Much more. Snoop wasn't about to let Elena's assumptions slide. He wasn't looking for a confrontation, but he certainly wasn't going to be dismissed without a word. He had learned that sometimes the only way to change people's perspectives was to challenge their assumptions head-on, to make them question their own biases. With a deliberate but measured pace, Snoop made his way toward the front desk, where Elena was speaking to a colleague. The conversation was polite, professional, but there was an underlying tension in the air. Elena glanced over her shoulder and saw Snoop approaching. The cool, collected expression on her face faltered for a moment, and she seemed to stiffen in place. "Is there something else I can help you with?" she asked, her voice now carrying a subtle edge of uncertainty, as if she had expected him to leave. Snoop stood tall in front of the desk, maintaining eye contact with Elena. He wasn't going to back down or let her off the hook so easily. "You know," he said, his voice calm but firm. You really shouldn't judge a book by its cover. His words were direct, but they weren't laced with anger. Instead, they were a challenge, an invitation for her to reflect on her behavior. Elena blinked, clearly caught off guard by his sudden shift in tone. For a moment, she said nothing, her lips parting slightly as if searching for the right words. But Snoop wasn't going to let her off the hook just yet. He had a point to make, and he was going to make it. All you had to do was treat me like a regular customer, he continued. You didn't even try to ask what I was looking for, what my budget was. Instead, you assumed that I didn't belong here. And that's not just insulting, it's bad business. Elena's eyes flickered, and for the first time in their exchange, she seemed to process the weight of his words. She had underestimated him, assuming he wasn't serious about buying a car. She had let her biases take over, and it was clear that she was beginning to recognize it. Elena started to speak, but Snoop raised a hand, cutting her off gently. I'm not trying to start trouble, he said, his tone softening just enough to show he wasn't angry. I just think you should think twice before making assumptions about people. It's easy to assume someone doesn't belong, but you never know who you're dealing with. The moment stretched on for a few seconds, the silence hanging between them like a delicate thread. Elena opened her mouth again, but this time, her voice was quieter, more measured. I apologize if I misjudged you, she said, her tone noticeably less cold than before. It wasn't my intention to make you feel unwelcome. Snoop nodded, his posture still relaxed but with a sense of resolve. Just remember, everyone deserves respect. You never know who's walking through the door, so don't judge them based on what they look like. With that, Snoop turned and walked back toward the cars, his mind clearer than it had been moments before. He wasn't sure whether Elena truly understood the lesson he was trying to teach her, but he hoped that at least for today, she would think twice before making assumptions. As he walked past the gleaming cars, Snoop knew he had made his point. The encounter hadn't been about getting the car he might have wanted or proving a point to Elena. It had been about something much deeper: respect. As Snoop left the dealership, he felt a strange sense of satisfaction, not because he had won some kind of battle, but because he had made Elena confront her assumptions. He had gone there with a simple goal: to see if he could find a car that matched his taste. But what had transpired felt far more significant. In that moment, Snoop had done more than just stand up for himself. He had reminded Elena that appearances could be deceiving and that everyone deserved respect, no matter their outward appearance. But the encounter wasn't over. As Snoop walked away from the showroom, he couldn't help but feel a nagging sense that something wasn't quite finished. He had made a point, yes, but there was still unfinished business. Something about the interaction left him wondering if there was more to be explored here. He knew he couldn't leave it at just that. The next day, Snoop made the decision to return to the dealership. He hadn't intended to go back so soon, but after thinking about it for a while, he realized he wanted to see if Elena had truly learned from their conversation. Maybe it was the lingering curiosity about how far her assumptions went, or maybe it was the desire to show her just how wrong she had been. When he entered the dealership once again, Elena was there behind the counter, her expression neutral. She didn't seem to remember him immediately, but there was a subtle tension in the air, a quiet acknowledgement that the previous day's encounter hadn't been forgotten. Snoop smiled to himself, knowing that she probably hadn't expected him to return. He approached the desk, his steps deliberate but not rushed. Hey, Elena, he greeted her, his tone light but with an edge of purpose. I've been thinking about something since yesterday. Elena looked up at him, a faint blush coloring her cheeks as she remembered the confrontation. Oh, she said, her voice cautious. I didn't expect you back so soon. Is there something else I can help you with? Snoop leaned against the desk, his eyes steady. Actually, there is, he said, his words measured. I've been thinking about the car I was looking at yesterday, and well, I'd like to buy it. Elena blinked, clearly taken aback. You want to buy a car? She asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. The assumption that he wasn't a serious buyer seemed to be hard for her to shake off, even after their previous conversation. Snoop nodded. Yeah, I've decided that this is the one I want. And I've got the funds to make it happen. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The uncertainty in Elena's eyes told him that she was struggling to process what he was saying. She had clearly expected him to walk away after their initial exchange. But here he was, prepared to buy the very car she had dismissed him from. But, Elena began, still hesitant. I thought you were just looking around. Are you sure you want to go through with it? Snoop chuckled softly. Why wouldn't I? Just because I don't look the part doesn't mean I don't have the means to buy the car. Sometimes, people make the mistake of assuming based on appearances, and that's not something I'm into. For a moment, Elena was silent, her expression conflicted. It was clear that she had misjudged him, and she was grappling with the realization of just how wrong she had been. But there was something else in her eyes, perhaps a mix of awe, confusion, and a hint of embarrassment. Snoop could tell she was trying to reconcile her previous assumptions with the reality standing in front of her. You really do want to buy it? Elena finally asked, her voice softening. There was an almost apologetic tone to her words now, a stark contrast to her earlier attitude. Snoop nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. Yeah, and I'm serious about it. He pulled out his phone and showed her the confirmation of his bank transfer, which was more than enough to cover the cost of the car. I've got the money right here. Elena's eyes widened, and for the first time since their encounter, she seemed genuinely flustered. The confidence she had displayed when dismissing him the day before seemed to vanish in an instant, replaced by a quiet recognition of her mistake. I didn't expect this, she said, her voice quieter now. I'm sorry for assuming. I should have known better. Snoop shrugged casually, not wanting to make her feel worse. It happens, he said, his tone forgiving but firm. But it's a good lesson. Don't judge people based on what you think you see. The revelation hung in the air, the gravity of the situation settling in. Elena had learned the hard way that assumptions could be costly. And in this case, it wasn't just a matter of being wrong. It was about being caught off guard by someone she had written off as an unlikely customer. As Snoop completed the paperwork and the deal was finalized, Elena took a step back, still processing the events. He could tell that she would be thinking about this moment for a long time. He had made a point, not just about the car he was purchasing, but about something far more important, the value of treating others with respect, no matter their appearance. Snoop drove off the lot in the new car, the engine humming smoothly beneath him. He knew that this encounter had been more than just a transaction. It had been a subtle revelation, one that would stay with both him and Elena for a long time. The morning after Snoop's visit to the dealership, Elena sat at her desk in the back office, her mind racing. It was still hard for her to wrap her head around the fact that the man she had brushed off as a low-budget shopper had not only purchased the car she'd shown him, but had also paid in full. Without hesitation, she replayed their conversation over and over in her head, mentally scrutinizing her words, her assumptions, and the way she had treated him. Her phone buzzed, breaking her train of thought. It was a message from her manager, Derek, calling for a quick internal meeting. Elena let out a sigh, wondering if this was going to be about the incident with Snoop. She couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort, knowing that her attitude the previous day had not only been unprofessional, but had also led to her misjudging a customer in the worst way possible. As Elena walked into the small conference room, Derek was already seated, his expression unreadable. Alongside him were two senior sales associates, James and Priya, who both appeared to be on edge as well. The atmosphere was tense, and Elena knew it was because of her earlier behavior. She took a deep breath and sat down, preparing herself for what was about to unfold. Morning, Elena, Derek began, his voice steady. We need to have a serious talk about yesterday's incident with the customer, Snoop. Elena's stomach tightened, and she nodded slowly, bracing herself for what was to come. Listen, I get that you were caught off guard, Derek continued, his tone surprisingly calm. But we have a policy here of treating every customer with respect, no matter who they are or what they look like. Your initial response to him was less than professional. Elena shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I know. I messed up. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and I didn't treat him the way I should have. Derek looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly as if to assess the sincerity of her apology. That's what I want to talk about. Assumptions can be dangerous. Elena, you assumed he didn't have the means to buy a high-end car. And in doing so, you not only disrespected him but also violated the core principle of customer service. It doesn't matter if someone walks in wearing a suit or a hoodie. Every person who steps into this dealership is a potential customer, and we need to show them the same level of respect. Priya, one of the senior sales associates, nodded in agreement. It's a lesson we've all had to learn at some point. Customers aren't defined by their outward appearance, and we can't afford to make assumptions based on stereotypes. People come from all walks of life, and some of the best clients we've had were the ones we almost missed because of our own biases. James chimed in, his voice softer but firm. I get that you were just trying to size him up based on how he looked. Elena, we all do it sometimes, but it's a slippery slope. Treating every customer with dignity, no matter how they present themselves, is a non-negotiable standard here. Elena felt a sinking feeling in her chest as the reality of the situation settled in. She had made a snap judgment, and that judgment had almost cost her the opportunity to make a sale, and worse, it had cost her the chance to build a genuine connection with a person who, for all she knew, could have been a regular customer. I understand, Elena said quietly, and I truly regret what happened. I've been thinking about it all morning, and I see now just how wrong I was. I should have treated him with the same level of respect I'd give anyone else, regardless of how he looked or what I thought he could afford. Derek nodded, appreciating her acknowledgement, but still pushing for deeper reflection. It's not just about this one incident, Elena. It's about the bigger picture. We work in a business that relies on trust and human connection. We can't afford to let our personal biases interfere with the job. You've got a lot of potential as a sales associate, but this kind of behavior won't fly here. Elena swallowed hard, feeling a lump in her throat. She had always prided herself on being good at her job, but this incident had exposed her flaws in a way she hadn't anticipated. I know I have a lot to learn, Derek. I promise I won't let this happen again. Derek gave her a measured look before leaning back in his chair. I hope so. We're all here to help each other grow. Elena, that's why we're having this conversation. Not to reprimand you, but to make sure you understand the impact of your actions. Respect is the foundation of any good relationship, whether it's with a customer or a coworker. If you can't grasp that, you'll find it hard to succeed here. Priya smiled warmly at Elena, offering her a moment of reassurance. We all make mistakes, Elena. What matters is that you learn from them, and I'm sure you will. Elena nodded, feeling the weight of their words. She had learned a valuable lesson, not just about her job, but about herself. The realization that her preconceived notions had led her astray had stung, but it was also an opportunity for growth. She couldn't afford to repeat the same mistake. Derek stood up, signaling that the meeting was coming to a close. All right, that's all for today. I expect to see a more open-minded approach from you moving forward. Let's make sure we're all giving our customers the respect they deserve. As the meeting adjourned, Elena lingered for a moment, reflecting on what had just transpired. She wasn't proud of the way she had acted, but she was determined to be better. She knew that the next time a customer walked into the dealership, no matter their appearance, she would be ready to treat them with the respect and dignity they deserved. She had learned the hard way that respect wasn't just about words, it was about actions, and she was ready to put that lesson into practice. As days passed following the internal meeting, Elena found herself reflecting deeply on the lessons she had learned. The weight of her mistake had initially been hard to bear, but it had sparked a shift in her perspective. The conversation with Derek, Priya, and James wasn't just a reprimand. It was a turning point. Elena was now committed to changing her approach, not just in how she interacted with customers, but also in her broader outlook on life and work. At first, the change was subtle. Elena made a conscious effort to stop herself from making quick judgments based on appearances. She began to listen more carefully to her customers, not just hearing their words, but also paying attention to their emotions and underlying needs. Every person who walked through the dealership doors, no matter how they looked or dressed, became an opportunity for her to practice respect, to show them that they mattered, and that she valued them as individuals. Over the next few weeks, Elena noticed a marked improvement in her interactions. She approached every customer with a newfound openness and genuine curiosity. Where she had once been quick to judge, she now took the time to connect with people, to understand their stories and needs. The results were undeniable. Her sales numbers began to climb, and more importantly, she received positive feedback from clients who appreciated her attentive, respectful approach. One of the most significant changes, however, came from within. Elena began to take a more proactive role in her personal development. She recognized that her success at the dealership wasn't just about making sales. It was about creating lasting relationships built on trust and mutual respect. She started reading more books on customer service and interpersonal communication, seeking ways to improve her skills and refine her approach. Elena's transformation didn't go unnoticed. Her colleagues began to comment on her change in attitude. Priya, who had initially helped guide her through the difficult conversation, pulled her aside one afternoon with a smile. "You've really grown, Elena. I can see the effort you're putting into this. It's making a huge difference." Elena smiled back, feeling a sense of pride she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Thanks, Priya. I've been working on it. It's not easy, but I'm learning." As her confidence grew, so did her ability to handle challenging situations. One afternoon, a well-dressed man walked into the dealership, his demeanor demanding attention. Elena recognized him immediately as a high-end client. But this time, she didn't allow her previous biases to cloud her judgment. Instead of treating him with the automatic respect she assumed he deserved, she took the time to ask questions, to really understand what he was looking for, and to offer a solution tailored to his needs. To her surprise, the client turned out to be a regular customer, someone who had been looking for a specific model for months but hadn't found the right salesperson to connect with. He was impressed by her thoughtful approach and offered to buy the car on the spot. Elena's newfound respect for all customers paid off again and again. She learned that respect wasn't just a matter of treating people well when they appeared deserving. It was about treating everyone with equal dignity and care, regardless of their outward appearances or assumptions she might have about them. As the months went by, Elena's reputation at the dealership changed. She was no longer the young sales associate who had once made hasty judgments about her clients. Instead, she became known for her ability to connect with people, to listen, and to offer them the experience they were looking for. Her sales numbers soared, and she found herself gaining more trust from her peers and supervisors. But perhaps the most profound result of Elena's change wasn't the increase in sales or accolades. It was the way she felt about herself. She had learned that true success wasn't about external validation. It was about the internal growth that came from learning from one's mistakes and striving to be better. By implementing the changes she had set in motion, Elena had found a deeper sense of purpose and fulfillment in her work. Looking back, Elena could now see the full scope of her journey, from her initial mistake with Snoop, to the lessons learned in that pivotal meeting, and finally to her growth as a professional and as a person. The process hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. It had forced her to confront her biases, to re-examine her values, and to ultimately become someone who was not only more effective at her job, but also a more respectful and empathetic person. Elena had become a true embodiment of the dealership's core values: respect, integrity, and connection. And as she walked through the dealership floor one afternoon, greeting each customer with a genuine smile, she realized that the true measure of her success was not in the number of cars she sold, but in the way she made her customers feel valued. Her journey of change had come full circle, and Elena was now more confident than ever that she was on the right path, ready to face whatever challenges came next with a heart full of respect and a mind open to the lessons still to come.